Hi everyone, this is Rabbi Jeff Sachs of Hatzid in the WebYeshiva again with our study of Rabbi Soloveitchik's Halakhic Man, picking up here on page 7 of the essay. Last week I found that a video of the Milky Way. I think it was just by coincidence that I mentioned this the phenomena that we live, in the modern world, particularly those that live in the cities, we live very much out of touch with seeing the night sky as it was once experienced. And that video really captured something which is an experience most of us do not have, sometimes ever, but certainly never on a regular basis. And I asked you to, pardon me 1 second, folks. Sorry about that. And I asked you if you experience it as a halakhic, as a cognitive man, a cognitive person, a scientific person, or as a Homo Religiosus, as a man of the mind or a man of the spirit. I got some very interesting responses from some of you. My apologies for my rather hoarse voice, but we'll try to soldier on, at least for a little while. Cognition, the act of understanding, the act of understanding, of examining the physical phenomena of the world. Cognition, according to the worldview of the man of God, of the Homo Religiosus. Well, Steve asked, isn't it possible to do the video in both ways? Certainly that's the case, and that's the point, that there are no pure cognitive men, and there are no pure Homo religiosi. In the real world, we are all mixtures of both. So then, certainly it's not possible, because none of us is either or. Cognition, according to the worldview of the man of God, of the Homo Religiosus, consists in the discovery of the wondrous and miraculous quality of the very laws of nature themselves. The religious man looks at the world, and he's looking for the laws that govern the world. In other words, what's more remarkable, what's more inspiring, what's more spiritual? To look at the natural world, or to understand that there is a system that stands behind it. Those laws of nature themselves are things of wonder and miracle. The mystery of the world is to be encountered precisely in the understanding of the functional relationship in effect between the phenomena of this world. Every classification of a phenomenon brings in its wake new enigmas. The more we understand, the more questions present themselves. It's a paradox, but it's true. Homo Religiosus sees the entire ordered world, the entire creation, which is delimited and bound by the laws of nature, as a cryptic text whose content cannot be deciphered, as a conundrum that the most resourceful of men cannot solve. The riddle of riddles is the very nature of the law itself. In a word, the cognitive act of Homo Religiosus is one of concealment and hiding. When we compare religious man to cognitive man, that's not to say that the religious person, the religious man, does not engage in cognition, does not engage in the attempt to understand the natural world. But the act of cognition of Homo Religiosus, of religious man, is one which leads to wonder. The more one understands he doesn't understand. And that leads to more concealment and more hiding. The more you understand how God runs the world, the more mysterious he becomes instead of the less mysterious. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Miriam, for the correction on my Latin. Homines religiosi, religious men. I got the religiosi correct. That's, this is a paradox that we sometimes have all experienced in our own lives, if not in that way. It's certainly very true for people that begin studying, anything that you think you understand, and then you begin to study it, and then you understand how much you don't understand. This is particularly true for people that come to learn Torah, for example. Rabbi Bravender's yeshiva, where I was once a student and once a teacher, was a yeshiva that, that kind of catered to and specialized in teaching young men who came to Torah study a little bit later. There was a common experience that we all had, that we all witnessed in others, of that point where you learn enough to know how much you don't know. In other words, half the experience of spending a year in yeshiva is just to learn everything that you don't know. That's by way of a metaphor to the Homo Religious's examination of the world. The more he studies, the more he cognizes God's running of the universe, the more mysterious God becomes. Now, chapter 3 of part 1. In truth, these two attitudes, the attitude of Homo Religiosus and that of the scientist, parallel the twofold nature of existence itself. The ontological dualism is a reflection of an ontic dualism. Reality possesses two faces. These terms, ontological and ontic. Ontic means mashayesh, that which is. So the dualism of that which is, the dualism of reality, of creation, is reflected in an ontological dualism. What does that mean? The world has two faces. The cosmos, the term the Rabbi Soloveitchik uses frequently, meaning the created world, Olam Hazeh, has two faces, has two aspects to it. And those two aspects are reflected in the fact that there are classically two ways of understanding the world or of experiencing the world. So ontic is that which is. Ontological is how it's understood. Ontological means how the world as is understood. It's not either or, it's both. But isn't that the way it is with all three-dimensional objects? If you and I are standing on opposite sides of a three-dimensional object, we're going to have very different experiences of it. Even if you and I are standing next to each other, imagine we put some three-dimensional object in the middle of a circle, and we are all of us, 360 of us, each one standing at a different compass point, standing around this circle. So the person who's standing at 12 o'clock on the clock face and the person standing at 6 o'clock on the clock face are going to have completely opposite experiences of the three-dimensional object that's in the middle, because we're looking at it from completely different sides. It may actually look completely different to each of us. But the person that's standing at 5:59 next to the person standing at 6 o'clock on the clock face we're standing very, very close to each other. And yet still, because of the fractional difference in our point of view, in our perspective, there are still going to be differences in how we perceive the object. So reality has, in the dualistic, the two-sided picture that Rabbi Soloveitchik is pointing here between science and religion, between the Homo Religiosus, between the cognitive man and Homo Religiosus, reality also presents itself with two faces. I thought of the that the Greek image of the Janus, the two-headed character, who lends his name to the month of January, which is the beginning or the end, depending on how you look at it, and looks in both directions, forward and backward. Reality is like that. There are two faces. There are two dimensions. There is a dualism in reality. There is the physical, created, scientific reality, and there is the ephemeral, spiritual side of reality. On the one hand, reality greets us with a cheerful countenance and reveals to us something of her essence. This personification of reality in the feminine. She grants us permission to gaze upon her and to peer at her image. She shows us a bit of her lawful structure and the order of her actions. In such moments of grace and compassion, the object submits itself to the subject, the thing to the person. Reality, to man who forms an inextricable part of existence, reality to intellect and knowledge. Here there blossoms forth the wondrous relationship between man and object, between subject and object, that is, between man, humanity, and the world, or reality. Cognizer and cognized. Those part of reality wants to be understood, wants to be discovered. The process of cognition, the problem of problems, the enigma of enigmas of man, reveals itself in all its splendor and majesty. It is in this act of grace, this act of disclosure, which nature at times performs for our benefit. That is the root of all human culture. This kind of anthropomorphism of reality, of nature, that it wishes to be understood, that it's almost flirting with us, hoping that we will discover. You imagine like nature, the forces of nature having a conversation. I mean, even the very idea that we anthropomorphize the laws of nature as Mother Nature, that, a kind of character. And here the fact that the Rav has chosen to similarly anthropomorphize the laws of nature in the feminine. She grants us permission. She shows a bit of her lawfulness. What was that commercial, way back when I was a kid? What was it for? It was for a margarine or something, where Mother Nature herself, she's dressed with like flowers in her hair. Mother Nature, she tastes the margarine, she thinks it's butter, and then she finds out it's margarine and says, oh, it's not nice to fool Mother Nature. I guess the point being that margarine is something very unnatural, although I presume that wasn't the advertising strategy back then. But the anthropomorphism of nature in the feminine as a person, here wanting to be discovered, wanting to be revealed, beckoning us to come and find out. You imagine Mother Nature having a conversation with itself, saying, oh, hey, there's that Newton fellow having a little snooze under a tree. Let's drop an apple on his head and see if he gets the hint. On the other hand, however, reality is possessed of an extreme modesty. At times she conceals herself in her innermost chamber and disappears from the view of the scholar and investigator. Everything bespeaks secrets and enigmas. Everything wonders and miracles. And reality is characterized by a strange feature. For at the very moment when she treats us generously and reveals to us a bit of her form, she covers much more. In Halakhic language, megale tefach umechaset fachayim. For every little secret that nature offers up, it conceals two other secrets. The problem increases as the cognition progresses. This is, what I was referring to earlier. The more we understand how little we understand. The Neo-Kantian philosophers have given striking expression to this ancient idea when they said that the function that holds between the solution and the problem, this is a metaphor that they use here at the top of page 9. The function that holds between the solution and the problem is analogous to the function that holds between the radius and circumference of a circle and its area. That is, of geometric expansion. You want one step forward, two steps backwards. The more you understand, the less you understand. Meaning, and then here you feel it necessary to spell out the mathematical formula. As the radius and circumference increase, arithmetically, the area increases geometrically. So just for those that need the review, there you are. Remember, the circumference of a circle, the distance around the outer edge, is calculated by 2 pi r. 2 times pi times the radius of the circle, the distance from the center to the edge. But the area of a circle is calculated by pi r squared. Pi, 3.14, times the distance of the radius squared. So that the longer the radius becomes, if you extend the radius of a circle, you all remember geometry, so we needn't review this. But if you lengthen the radius of a circle, the circumference is going to grow arithmetically. But the overall area of the circle is going to grow geometrically because of the squaring of the radius. That is the mashal that he's playing with, the metaphor he's playing with, to explain the distance between understanding. For everything we understand, it grows arithmetically. We add to our knowledge brick by brick. But with every piece of data added to our knowledge, the mystery grows even larger. This is true about a lot of things. Reality presents itself in a certain way. And then because we perceive the world in a certain way. We perceive the world as flat. It wasn't for nothing that ancient man thought the world was flat. Pok chazi v'nira, go outside and look around. It looks like we live on a pancake, not on a sphere. If you know nothing about the principles of the movement of bodies through space and of gravity, it's more logical to think that we live on a giant pancake. The the knowledge that in fact we do live on a giant sphere, but yet we don't fall off as it goes hurtling through. Not only do they think that we live on a giant pancake, but that we live on a stationary giant pancake. And all the stars and planets that we could observe moving around in the heaven were moving because that's the way it appeared. The knowledge that in fact the stars are stationary, we are hurtling through space in an elliptical orbit around the sun, which appears to be moving but is in fact stationary, and we are not on a pancake but on a basketball, but yet as it's spinning around at fantastic speed, we don't go whisking off into space. That knowledge raises even more questions about the movement of bodies in space, about the principles of gravity, etc., etc., etc. The sun and the moon appear to us as being the same size. So much so that it's puzzling to the Midrash that why you would have these two equivalent bodies in the sky, although one is a magnitude of power that is different than the other, and one waxes and wanes and one is constant. But in fact, they're not at all the same size. The sun is about 400 times greater than the moon. But because the sun is about 400 times more distant than the moon, it creates this optical illusion of them appearing to us as equivalent sizes. The knowledge that they are in fact not the same size raises all types of questions. Would be less physically graspable. Let me look at what Ari is saying here. It's exponential. Yeah, but isn't that what Arya, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that what it means for something to grow geometrically? That because of the square, it's growing exponentially. I'm not sure if I catch it, but I'm not such an expert on these things. But again, these examples that I'm bringing are just to demonstrate that sometimes a bit of knowledge leads to greater questions. That's true in the physical world, but in other realms, it's similarly true. We live in a world. We organize our lives around certain notions because we experience certain emotions. Love being extremely powerful, perhaps the most powerful emotion. But love is a mystery. It's such a mystery that it's inspired great art and poetry and literature, because that's the power of such mysteries. So the scientists will come along and try to give a biochemical explanation for what we experience as love. And they'll explain this, that, or the other thing. That it has all to do with endorphins and with chemicals in the brain, and we feel these things for our children, or we feel these things for a partner or a love, for various reasons, for impulses that we feel. Even were that to be true, besides the fact that it doesn't really help us lead our lives, which is a question that science sometimes has to contends with. The degree to which the knowledge it adds helps us lead our lives. Besides the fact that such knowledge doesn't really help us lead our lives as spouses and as parents, it raises a multitude of other questions. Sometimes the mystery is more powerful than the knowledge. Existence plays a mischievous game with us, as though to tease and provoke us. Okay. Arya, is that true? Arya is making the point about the sun and the moon. Indeed. Okay. But for all of recorded human history, it's been more or less where it is, the moon in relation to the sun. Okay. In the midst of knowledge, there yet once again arises the mystery. In the midst of contemplation, the riddle gains new strength. As was stated above, all scholarly scientific attainments derive from the candid, open, and obliging aspect of reality. From its modest and retiring aspect, however, steam forth all the oppositions and contradictions in cognition. In other words, one face of reality, the open face, the engaging face, that's the one that provides all of our scientific knowledge. But its sister face, it's the opposite side, the dark side of that moon, provides all the question and the mystery. And it's a kind of yin and yang, pulling against each other, of revealing and concealing, of answering and questioning. From its modest and retiring aspect, for the opposite, all the antinomies in that image of the cosmos which is revealed to us, all the unsolvable problems and all of the rationality and strangeness which at times appears to us in that picture of reality that hovers before our eyes. As emphasized above, the ontic dualism, this kind of built-into creation, the dualism, the two-sidedness that exists in creation of understandable and incomprehensible, is transformed into an ontological dualism. Just like the world has aspects of it that, again, by world I don't necessarily mean, I don't mean planet Earth, I mean all of creation. All of creation. Just as all of creation, like all of creation, in all of creation, there's part which is understandable and part which is incomprehensible. That is reflected in the two attitudes that these two characters, these pure types, bring to their cognition. We, in the real world, each of us, is sometimes this and sometimes that. The duality in the attitudes of cognitive man and Homo Religiosus is rooted in existence itself. Cognitive man concerns himself with a simple and candid reality. He does not seek to closet himself with the hidden in existence, but rather focuses his attention on its revealed aspect. This is not the case with Homo Religiosus. The scientist is concerned with understanding, examining, measuring measurable phenomena. But that's not the case with Homo Religiosus. He, religious man, clings to a reality which, as it were, has removed itself from the cognizing subject and has barred the intellect from all access to it. He is totally devoted and given over to the cosmos that is filled with divine secrets and eternal mysteries, the very nature of the law itself. The very phenomena of cognition is an open book for cognitive man and a closed one for Homo Religiosus. And then he brings these quotes, psukim that he liked to refer to again and again, from Eov, towards the end of the book of Job, when patient, long-suffering Job has been goaded by his quote-unquote friends into cursing God, questioning God, demanding answers. God's response out of the whirlwind, min ha'sa'ara, back to Eov, is, where were you when I laid the foundations for the earth? Declare if you have understanding. Who determined the measures, if you know? Or who stretched the line upon it? Whereupon were the foundations thereof fastened, or the cornerstone laid? Have the gates of death been revealed to you? I'm modernizing the English, as you'll see. Have you entered the treasuries of the snow? Do you know the time when the wild goats the rock bring forth? Does the hawk soar by thy wisdom? Etc., etc. Meaning, Eov, you don't understand the ABCs of how creation works. You're questioning me, Eov. You're questioning me about how I run the world, about suffering that exists in the world, about even your own suffering, and how your reward and punishment have been meted out. You know nothing about how I manage the world. How can you have the audacity to ask questions about things that you understand nothing about? That's one component of reality. The consciousness of Homo Religiosus is overflowing with questions that will never be resolved. He scans reality and is overcome with wonder. He fixes attention on the world and is astonished. Moreover, the astonishment that overwhelms Homo Religiosus does not serve simply as a prod to stimulate metaphysical curiosity. It is not just a device to excite the cognitive imagination. It is not just a means to an end, as Aristotle thought, but it is the ultimate goal and crowning glory of the process of cognition of Homo Religiosus. Astonishment, wonder. It's a mistake to think that Homo Religiosus, the religious person, is not also interested in examining the world, is not interested in understanding the world. Just as the scientist, the cognitive man, is interested in understanding the world. Surely he is interested. The purpose for which cognitive man, the scientist, seeks out to understand the world, if we will superimpose those other characters that we remember from our study of the lonely man of faith. And there is some correspondence between cognitive man and Adam the First versus Homo Religiosus and Adam the Second. It's not a one-to-one correlation. They can't be grafted onto each other exactly. But to whatever degree that there is a parallel between these two different typological analyses of creation, cognitive man seeks to, who remembers what Adam the First's task is in creation? Well, give a name. It's true that's one of his activities, but no, not to take care of the world, Miriam. That's Adam the Second. La'avda u'lashamra is the motto of Adam the Second. What's the motto of Adam the First? What's his relationship to creation? To conquer it. Correct, Jason. V'kivshuha. V'kivshuha. Right, remember, let me pull up that Here you go. Where is it? The file's uploading. Is this it? No. No, that's not it. Sorry, let me get the right file. Yes, here we go. Remember, in The Lonely Man of Faith, Rabbi Soloveitchik pointed out that the story of creation is told twice. First, in the first chapter of Bereshit, and in the second chapter. And there are numerous differences between the two tales. And he develops this idea of two different components of the human personality, which he, like in our work, treats typologically, and he presents these pure types, one as exemplified in the first chapter, Adam the first, and one as exemplified in the second chapter, Adam the second. Adam the first is created whole. Zacharu nekeva baraota. The story of the creation of man, woman, they're created the same. There is no moment in which Adam is alone, which is not true in the second chapter. In the second chapter, you have the story of Adam being created. He's alone. He looks out at the animals. He sees that they each have a mate. He is alone in creation. Lo tov heyot adam levado. It's not good for man to be alone. God declares, as solo ezer kenegdo, and then you have the story of the rib being taken and being formed into Eve, and then forming union. That's all built into creation according to the first chapter. In Genesis chapter 1, man is created in God's holy image, b'tselem Elokim. In chapter 2, he's created afar min ha'adamah, from the dust, the lowly dust of the earth. Adam the first, majestic Adam, is tasked with pru mlu et haaretz, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, vikiv shua, and conquer it, seek dominion over it, over the world, over the animals in the world. Adam the second, covenantal man, who has to seek out a partnership, principally with Eve, but with fellow man as well. He is tasked, la'avda u'l'shamra, to preserve and defend the world. A very different task. And of course, like in Halakhic Man, there are no Adam 1s, there are no Adam 2s. We each possess both of these characteristics, and we have to find balance between them in our life. But to whatever degree Adam the first corresponds to cognitive man, to the scientist, and Adam the second to Homo Religiosus, the religious man, and of course some have written on this topic, the scientist seeks to cognize the world, to understand the world, to dissect it, to analyze it, in order to gain mastery over it. The Homo Religiosus seeks to cognize the world, for he too also is interested in understanding it, but because the more he understands, the greater sense of wonder he has, astonishment. Now, of course, you'll give examples of scientists who are profoundly spiritual creatures, who look at whatever realm of science they have, and they also have awe and wonder. I'm not very mathematically inclined. But I have a brother-in-law who is. I have two brothers-in-law who are unreasonably intelligent. One wrote a PhD about black holes, which I tried to read once, but it was a little scary. And another one who has a PhD in computer science and is much more of a mathematical mind. And he was once like looking at a math book, it was a graduate level math book, and he remarked on the beauty of a certain mathematical equation. So you can marshal evidence like that to show that even the scientists, but that's because these brothers-in-law of mine, they live in this world. They are not pure typological presentations of diametrically opposed characteristics. In the real world, we can be both. But in the pure laboratory of the presentation, it's either this or that, the religious man or the scientist. And of course, like I mentioned last time, he does this in order to lay down certain pure personalities to understand, like in the I forgot the word again. Like in the after 10 o'clock at night, there are certain words I just forget. In the centrifuge, you put it all into the centrifuge. You separate it out into the component parts in order to understand matters in their essence. But in reality, nothing is ever that neat. So for the scientist, knowledge is there in order to gain mastery. For the Homo Religiosus, the acquisition of knowledge is because it leads to wonder. I apologize. I had hoped that we would cover much more ground tonight, but as you can hear, I don't think I can utter much more than another dozen words or so. On the next page, the Rav gets into a discussion of the Rambam, and he makes reference to the Moreh Nevuchim, Part 1, chapters 59 and 60. There's a link to it in English on the source that's available, the translation that's available on the internet. It's not the best translation in the world, but it's certainly workable. If, when you read ahead, you also want to take a look at those sections from the Moreh Nevuchim, the God of the text, it would be useful and recommended to you. And we'll pick up next week, more or less, where we left off, but hopefully we'll start making better progress. Thanks for your good wishes, and we will meet again next week.